Hello and welcome. My name is Michelle, and recently I read a Russian classic translated to English called Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Today we're going to discuss Crime and Punishment. Now, I am most comfortable in the sci-fi realm. I read a lot of sci-fi, but my secondary favorite genre is mystery. I wouldn't necessarily say that Crime and Punishment fits into the category of mystery. However, I will say that some of my favorite things in sci-fi stories tend to be stories about morally ambiguous people. I like reading about the bad guys, and if there is a book ever written about the bad guy, I don't know what is if it is not Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Today I want to discuss why it works so well for me and, some things to caution yourself on if you are looking into trying this classic. These are things that I think you should be warned in advance of. The things that matter the most to me in most of the stories that I read are going to be the characters, the world building, the themes, and the plot. Those elements together really draw me in and get me hooked on a story, and so those are the elements that I'm going to talk to you about today. I think the first topic we should discuss is going to be the plot of Crime and Punishment. The story is definitely character-driven, and the plot itself is relatively slow. Because of the fact that it's character-driven, a lot of the story is told through the characters' inner monologues, and not as much through action. In fact, the actual action that takes place within the story is very few and far between. There's a couple of highlight moments, but even if I were to tell you what those highlight moments were, it's nothing compared to, say, like a war story. I actually really enjoyed the plot. I didn't take very long to get invested into the story and to what was happening, but I think what was most interesting is what was psychologically happening with the characters, and so a lot more plot would have gotten in the way of the psychology of the characters. So I would say that the plot is fantastic for what it is, but I can definitely see some people finding it to be a little bit slow. Obviously, this isn't a sci-fi book. This isn't a fantasy book. So what do I really mean by world building? I think what I mean when I say world building, and I've been doing some thinking about this because I give it a really high rating for world building. What matters to me is that the setting feels real, and I think that's what I mean by world building. Good world building means that I believe this world, I want to learn more about this world, I'm obsessed with the world, and I would have to say in Crime and Punishment, I am obsessed with the world. There's something very fascinating about this society. So the story takes place in St. Petersburg, Russia, which in the time, the 1860s, this was an area of a lot of forward thought when it came to things like psychology and like philosophy and these kinds of things. It was one of the more forward-thinking cities, and because of that, it had a lot of intellectuals, a lot of people all over the spectrum. It's a real world. And I think that's what makes it so fascinating, because I know that this author was writing it in the time that he was there, and the setting was very present for him, whereas for us, it's old. We're talking like 200 years almost, or 150 years or whatever. And I have to make this comparison because I can't unsee it. And this did kind of infuse with my view of the world. I don't know if any of you are aware of a 2000-something game called Pathologic. It is a Russian game about a guy who goes to this little town in the middle of nowhere to try to prove that immortality is possible. And now that strain of thought is not necessarily related to Crime and Punishment, but the setting really reminds me of Crime and Punishment, except if you were to take it and make it a lot bigger. Like, the game takes place obviously in a small town. St. Petersburg is a big town, but something about the culture and something about the vibe, just play the music from Pathologic while listening to this story, and I think it fits. The heat in the street was terrible, and the airlessness, the bustle, the plaster, scaffolding, bricks, and dust all about him, and that special Petersburg stench. all worked painfully upon the young man's already overwrought nerves. Learning about this culture and learning about this society in this time was fascinating because you really got to do so through the characters. So I think it's about time we go ahead and discuss the characters. Like I said, during talking about the plot and about the world building, it's a very character driven story. A lot of the world building is even told through the characters' perspectives and how they interact with each other, because the way that they interact with each other is really showing us a lot about this time in history. It's only appropriate to kind of talk about a couple of characters and then the characters overall. So I think the first and most important character that we want to discuss is Raskolnikov. Now, if you are into MBTI, he is an INTJ. He kind of sees himself as better than society. He sees himself as morally superior to society, and he wants to do something about that, but he's also, severely depressed, and we get to see his mind kind of losing it. Like, we really get to see his mind lose it. I mean, it's absolutely believable, absolutely fascinating, and but some of the things some of the things that happen can feel a little unbelievable. But I think you have to take into account that this happened so long ago. I mean, yeah, it's fictional, but regardless, the way that people interacted and the way that people solved crimes back then was very different to how they solve them now. If you like things like Sherlock or Death Note or Parasite, where it is very focused on this sort of chess game between the main characters, I think that you will very much so enjoy the chess game that is Raskolnikov at every moment, because, he commits the murders right in the very beginning of the story. That is not a spoiler. That is literally the premise of the story. He kills this lady in the very beginning of the story. It has effects on him, and it has effects on the people around him, and he is very clever. Rodion Raskolnikov against Porfiry Petrovich. Like, it's just the alliteration. And it's difficult to say as somebody who does not speak Russian. I have to wonder, if you are someone who speaks Russian, are these names easy to pronounce? Because they're kind of confusing, and I know that part of that is because I don't speak Russian, but I feel like some of it is the pronunciation. Like, there has to be like a little bit of tongue twister stuff happening here. Like, or is it just really my inability to speak the language Russian? Anywho, all the characters, Razmukhin, Luzhin, Dunya, Sophia, they're all so good. And one thing that I have to commemorate, one thing that I think is really, really interesting about his writing style in general, is that depending on what character's point of view you're kind of in, which he does switch sometimes, he mostly tells the story from Raskolnikov's point of view, but sometimes he does go to different characters, and when he does, the prose and the things that he talks about changes. Now, there's this one character where this moment really stood out to me, and that character is Katerina. She is getting kind of manic, and she's kind of a quintessential ESFJ, and if you're not really in on the MBTI lingo, basically what that means is she is constantly evaluating whether or not people are doing what they're supposed to for this particular event. So she's like, is that how they should be behaving for this event? Are people happy? Are people feeling the right feeling for this event? And she's like trying to manage that, but she's also going manic. But the writing style in and of itself is just fascinating. It's not like Raskolnikov is telling us about Katerina. It's like Katerina is telling us what's going on in her mind. And Raskolnikov is really, he's there, but he only gets mentioned. And that's something that I really appreciate about this writing style as well. I don't know if you guys know this, but I really, 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 really love multiple points of view. So if you can sprinkle those in and do a good job, which, yes, does a great job, then this book is definitely for you. The last thing that I think just really sells this book for me and really makes it worth probably multiple rereads is the fact that the themes are so interesting. There is a lot to talk about from this book. from the morality to the conversations about utilitarianism to the conversations about socialism to the conversations about how people in society really act. I mean, it is jam-packed with things to talk about. And I think most interestingly, what there is to talk about is the morality, and the morality of different characters. The morality about different characters, and also discussing his intention with this novel. I think that when someone is so clear with what they're trying to say, that you can really pick apart and try to figure out their intention based off what the story did, I think that that makes a story more interesting. I don't know. Like, yeah, I mean, it's cool to read a story that's fun to burn through, but when there's an intention behind it more than just to have a good time, I'm all about that, and this book I am all about. There's a live stream that I did with my friend the other day, which I will link up above, so you can watch that if you want to get more into those conversations. We definitely delve deeper on all these things that I just have been talking to you about. These are the things that I wish I knew going into reading Crime and Punishment. The translation is going to be a little rough. I mean, this translation in particular is by Constance Garnett. I don't know, wait, when was it written? So the translation was written in the 50s, and I've read books that were written in the 50s, so I know that this is not just like how people talked back then. The way that it's translated is almost as if you word for word translated Russian to English and didn't even change the sentence structure sometimes. Like sometimes it just really reads like I'm reading something by Google Translate, that they were like, this is exactly what those words mean in that order. Is that exactly the point that they're trying to get across? I don't know, but that's what the words are. So I'm going to give you the words. Whereas when I picked up the other version, which is the one with like the black and white stripes, it has two translators. Oh my God, that was just leaps and bounds better. I mean, there were some quirky things that they did that I wasn't a huge fan of, like some of the artistic choices they made, like they said the latter or the former a lot instead of using people's names, which I don't like that because I lose track. But the translation is so much better, leaps and bounds. It is modernized. It is written in a way where you can see what he's trying to say, like you can get a good grasp of the story that way. This version is a little bit more work. The Constance Garnett version is a little bit more work. It's readable. And by the time I got like halfway through, it became easier. It is a little bit of a slower one to get into because the language is just so far off from normal speaking language. If it was just like older English, that I think would still be easier than this. It's just because the structure of the sentences and some of the word choices are just odd. They just feel not quite right. Translation aside, if you're someone who's really character driven and you need to like the main character, this book is probably not for you. He's not the most likable. I loved him, but I love the bad guy. So, you'll know right away if you're going to like him. I think you'll know by the end of the first chapter if you're going to like him, because that's just kind of how he is, the whole story. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Crime and Punishment. I loved this book. It got a really high rating. Actually, let me check. This book got a 9.5 out of 10, which is pretty high for me. I don't think there's many other books that are above 9 on my list, and that's saying something. I have a feeling this may end up being my favorite book of the year. We'll see. There's still a couple months left, but this guy might be it. This might be the one. This might be the story, which breaks me into classics. My friend Christy from Dostoevsky in Space, as you can maybe imagine by her channel title, she really likes Dostoevsky a lot. And she actually read Crime and Punishment, and that's what got her into reading classics in general. And she's reread the thing multiple times, and I can see why she's read it so many times. And in my conversation with her and Alana, we were talking about the brothers Karamazov. I think that's how you pronounce it. And they were saying it's just like it takes this and takes it to the next level. We get more insight into the different characters for longer. And I just have to say I am here for it. Anyway, Thank you so much for watching. If you are interested in sci-fi, books, movies, anything psychological, I just love psychological things. I think at the end of the day, my preference is actually psychological, not necessarily the setting, though the setting is helpful. I love a sci-fi setting. If we could have like a sci-fi Crime and Punishment, ooh, I would be for it. But anyway, thank you so much for watching my video today. If you like this video and want to see more by me, go ahead and like and subscribe. And while you're at it, I hope you have a beautiful, amazing, fantastic day. Bye. It's hard to like find their names. Proffery shook his head. Proffery. Proffery, what is your last name? Proffery Petrovich. Porfiry Petrovich.